Beneath the silent pulse of the night sky, where modern eyes see only distant spheres of gas and stone, the ancients saw gods, not metaphorically, but literally, among them. One burned with a beauty too bright, too erratic, too perfectly timed, to be of this world. They called it by many names: Ishtar, Inanna, Astarte, Aphrodite, Lucifer, the light bringer. But to those initiated in the temples of forgotten civilizations, it was not merely a planet, it was a living symbol, a cipher, cloaked in veils of myth and geometry, hiding the secret choreography of divine order and human destiny. Venus, the brightest object in the sky after the sun and moon, dances in a pattern that repeats. Every 8 years, 5 times she descends and rises, creating a celestial pentagram etched invisibly into the heavens. This is not poetic flourish, it is an astronomical fact, and yet it is precisely this pentagram that became the hidden emblem of countless mystery cults and occult orders, etched into ancient temples, burned into the memory of secret societies, and whispered in the dark corners of forbidden manuscripts. But what made Venus sacred was not just its beauty or pattern, it was its duality. For Venus is both the morning star and the evening star. It rises just before dawn and falls just after sunset. In this, the ancients saw the cycle of death and rebirth, of descent into the underworld and ascent into divinity. This celestial motion was mirrored in their rites, encoded in their myths. And so it was with Inanna, the Sumerian goddess of love, war, and cosmic inversion. She who descends into the underworld not as a victim, but as a sovereign, stripped of all her earthly symbols, confronted by her shadow twin, and reborn transformed. The entire myth of Inanna's descent maps precisely onto the cycle of Venus disappearing from the night sky for 8 days, and then reappearing in the east, radiant and resurrected. Is this coincidence, or is it code? The priests of Uruk did not think in metaphors. To them, the sky was a sacred manuscript, and Venus was its most elusive line. They built ziggurats aligned to her rise. Their temples echoed with chants invoking her dual power as seductress and destroyer, light bringer and shadow walker. The glyphs we now read as myth were, in truth, astral initiations, teaching how to descend into the self and return transfigured. And Venus, ever so faithful in her 8 year cycle, was their guide. But the mystery did not end in Mesopotamia. In Egypt, the goddess Hathor, cow-headed mother of joy and the sky, bore similar traits. She too vanished and returned. She too wore the 5-pointed crown, a symbol found in tombs aligned with Venus's heliacal rising. And in the rites of Isis, the initiate played the role of the goddess searching for her beloved Osiris, descending into darkness, only to reclaim the divine spark lost in the material world. Across the Mediterranean, into the temples of Astarte in Phoenicia, and the erotic violent cults of Aphrodite in Greece, the same signature appears: Venus as the goddess of contradiction, of pleasure and peril, seduction and sacred death. This dual face, this paradox, is the true secret of Venus. She is not simply the goddess of love, she is the cipher of transmutation, the alchemical bride who seduces the initiate into descending, not into fleshly desire, but into the labyrinth of the soul. And only those who dare descend with her, endure her shadows, and return bearing light, may come to know what she truly is. The ancients knew Venus is not a planet. She is a gate, and through that gate, something waits. The trail leads us now from the sky to the earth, from the orbit of the star to the marble and mud brick where her worship became flesh. To understand Venus, one must not only look upward but step inside the temples that bore her name, temples that still whisper, through ruin and symbol, the rites that once drew blood and spirit alike. Let us begin with Uruk, one of the oldest cities known to human history. There in the Ina precinct stood the great temple of Inanna, whose very name means Lady of Heaven. This was no passive shrine. It was an engine of transformation. The high priestess in two was not merely a servant of the goddess. She was her living vessel. Clad in garments embroidered with celestial glyphs, she performed higher organic rites, sacred unions between human and divine, reenacting the marriage of Venus and the shepherd king Dumuzi. These were not symbolic. They were meant to alter reality, to bring cosmic harmony down to the soil, to ensure fertility, sovereignty, and spiritual order. To step into the temple was to enter a microcosm of the heavens, where the very structure aligned with celestial rhythms. Every aspect of the sanctuary was encoded with the logic of Venus. Five-sided geometries, rare in architecture, adorned altars, oil lamps were arranged to mimic the 5 synodic cycles. Even the calendar of rites followed an 8-year sequence, mirroring the planet's celestial dance. This is not coincidence. This is ritual astronomy, a science so sacred it was never written plainly. From summer we move west, across the sands and the centuries, to Byblos, city of cedars and sailors. Here the cult of Astarte, daughter of the sea and mother of kings, rose to prominence. Her temples stood above sacred harbors, where merchant priests tracked the horizon not only for ships, but for the morning rise of the star. To Astarte were offered perfumes, blood, and songs of ecstatic lamentation. Her rites were nocturnal. Her symbols bore serpents, doves, and 8 trade stars, all celestial glyphs of Venus, and always mirrors. The sacred mirrors of these cults were more than decoration. Polished obsidian, hammered bronze, pools of oil and silver basins, these were tools of divination. To gaze into them at the correct hour, under the influence of the star, was to enter a trance. One did not merely see their reflection. One entered the other face of the goddess, the face not seen in daylight. It was this face that terrified patriarchal powers to come, for in the cult of Venus was a secret they feared, a feminine gnosis, a path to inner power that bypassed priesthood, bloodline, and law. Venus taught the initiate to descend and rise by inner alchemy, not outer obedience. Her temples offered transformation without confession, initiation without chains. Her worship included sex, yes, but not lust, rather eros as metaphysical force, as the electric fusion of dualities, male and female, light and dark, mortal and divine. Thus in time, her temples were burned, her names changed, her rites outlawed, but she survived, in secret, through symbols, the 5-pointed star, the rose with 5 petals, the veiled goddess in alchemical texts, the sorceress of medieval grimoires. These are her fragments, reassembled by secret orders, preserved in silence, hidden in plain sight. The Templars inscribed her geometry into cathedrals. The Rosicrucians concealed her sigil within treatises on celestial medicine. In the tarot, she became the high priestess and the empress. In Renaissance art, she emerged as Venus Anadyomene. Born from the sea, naked yet veiled, beauty concealing power. But always, her cult begins in the mirror, that moment when the initiate confronts not their face, but their shadow, and in that shadow sees the star. It is not by accident that Lucifer, the fallen angel, bears her name. But the fall was never a fall. It was a descent, a necessary one, and Venus, the gatekeeper, still waits at the threshold. There is a doorway beneath every temple, a descent carved in stone, in story and silence. The ancients did not veil their truths in upward conquest, but in the surrender to depth, for what ascends without first dying? In every myth where Venus appears in her true form, not the sanitized goddess of beauty, but the bearer of terrible love and sacred annihilation, she descends. We begin again with Inanna, Queen of Heaven. Her myth is older than Genesis, older than the Iliad, older than Empire. In it, she hears the call of the underworld, not because she must, but because she chooses. This is crucial. She is not cast down. She walks the path. She dons her regalia, the crown, the breastplate, the necklace of lapis, the rod of authority. At each gate of the underworld, a guardian demands a sacrifice. 7 gates, 7 veils, 7 aspects of self surrendered. until at last naked, and bowed Inanna enters the throne room of Ars Occulta, her sister, her shadow, the queen of the dead. There, Inanna is judged, struck, hung upon a hook. 3 days and 3 nights pass. Do you hear the echo? It is the same cycle mirrored in Venus's celestial disappearance. For 8 days every 19 months. She vanishes, neither morning nor evening star, dead in the sky, and then she rises again. Reborn in the east, radiant, changed, so too does Inanna return, but never as before. She is resurrected through the rites of sympathetic beings, her loyal servant, her emissaries. She brings with her the knowledge of death, the power of the unseen. This descent is not merely a tale. It was ritual. In Mesopotamia, priestesses reenacted the descent as sacred theater. The initiates, stripped of symbols, were led blindfolded into dark chambers beneath the temple. There, they were confronted with visions, orchestrated, perhaps, through entheogens, mirrors, or sound. They faced their own doubles, shadows, fears. And only those who endured without turning away were permitted to rise again, to receive the kiss of the goddess. This mystery crossed borders. In the Greco-Roman world, Aphrodite retained the lineage, though softened in myth. Her presence remained volatile. In Cyprus and Corinth, her temples blurred the lines between sacred love and ecstatic trance. In her oldest forms, she was not born of Zeus, but of foam and blood from the sea after Uranus was castrated, a creation from violent severance, a goddess born not of union but of rupture. And in the Orphic mysteries, another descent emerges, that of Persephone, stolen into Hades, but in some versions, it is she who chooses. And her return each spring becomes not just the return of crops, but of inner renewal. Her journey, too, mimics Venus, the disappearance, the silence, the reemergence. The sacred pattern is clear. Only through the underworld can transformation occur. In the Hermetic texts, the principle is stated plainly, as above so below, but its inverse is just as crucial. As within so without. To descend into Venus is to descend into the self, into the unconscious, into the labyrinthine chamber where identity dissolves, masks fall, and the primal truth is encountered, that we are not who we believe, but who we become in darkness. This is why Venus was feared. Not because she tempted the body, but because she disarmed the ego, because she led the seeker beyond the masks of culture, doctrine, and name, to a raw and ancient power that institutions cannot control. And once awakened, that power does not sleep. It begins to rise, not as dogma, not as belief, but as knowing. And it is this knowing born of descent that brings us to the deeper layers of the cults, those that endured in hidden orders, where Venus was no longer a goddess, but an initiation. After the temples fell and the idols were shattered, Venus did not vanish, she migrated into symbols, into ciphers, into the whispering networks of secret initiates who preserved her gnosis beneath the iron veil of rising dogma. In the shadow of empire and church, the mysteries of the star goddess were driven into concealment. But, as history has shown, what is exiled becomes alchemical. It transforms under pressure, multiplies in silence, and returns more potent than before. Venus entered the underworld of history, and from there she began to shine in forbidden ways. Among the Pythagoreans, her fivefold cycle became a cornerstone of sacred geometry. The pentagram, Venus's celestial signature, was revered not merely as a shape, but as a map of harmonic proportion, a key to the mystery of divine design. The human body, too, echoed her rhythm: 5 fingers, 5 senses, 5 extremities. The microcosm mirroring the goddess star. The Gnostics, those mystics of light and shadow, encoded Venus in their vision of the pleroma, the fullness beyond the material veil. In some sects, Sophia, the fallen feminine eon, is associated with the same descent-resurrection cycle, a cosmic Venus cast into matter, seeking reunification through knowledge. In these visions, Venus was not evil, but exiled light, the divine spark trapped in the illusion of form, awaiting reawakening in the initiate. Later, in the Kabbalistic tradition, the Sephira Netzach, sphere of beauty, desire, and victory, corresponds to Venus. Netzach sits on the pillar of mercy, echoing the goddess's role as bringer of both pleasure and judgment. In Kabbalah, it is through the balancing of Netzach and its polar opposite, Hod, that the astral body is formed, the vehicle of ascent, the alchemical child born from polarized force. And yet, it is in the esoteric orders of the Renaissance that Venus truly blooms in secret. In the Rosicrucian manifestos, we find repeated references to the five-petaled rose, blooming within the cross, symbol not only of the planet, but of inner rebirth. The rose is sacred geometry, celestial rhythm, and divine memory converging. In their allegories, the rose becomes a symbol of the transfigured soul, one who has endured the descent and returned carrying the philosopher's fire. The alchemists, too, encoded Venus in the language of metals. She became associated with copper, the red gold of Venus, ruled by the element of water yet resistant to corrosion. Alchemically, copper represents the soul's conductivity, its ability to carry the charge of divine love, to radiate harmony, to transform through resonance rather than force. The alchemist's Venus was not merely symbolic, it was a force to be harnessed. In some grimoires, Venusian timings were used to create talismans of beauty, magnetism, and persuasion, tools for Magian naturalists, the ancient science of shaping subtle reality. But the deepest guardians of Venus's legacy may have been the Templars. Within their suppressed rituals, whispered across centuries of speculation, lie traces of the feminine mystery, the Black Madonna, the Sephira, the veiled lady beneath the temple. Some claim the Templars worshipped a being called Baphomet, whose name, decrypted through esoteric numerology, conceals the formula Sophia Templi Passus Abbas, the wisdom of the temple. The Abyss of Peace, a Venusian echo and the most controversial of relics. And then there are the Cathars, the troubadours, the court of love movements dismissed as romantic but steeped in deeper codes. The courtly lady, distant and radiant, unattainable yet transformative, was no mere noblewoman. She was Venus, hidden in plain sight, drawing the soul toward a love that transcended flesh. The true aim was not seduction, but sublimation. Each of these threads, woven across lands and centuries, shared one trait: the transformation of the Venus mystery from outer right to inner path. She became not just the star or the goddess, but the internal compass, the magnet that draws the seeker inward, downward, and finally through. The forbidden light she offers is not brightness for the eyes, but luminescence for the soul, a light born not of comfort, but of confrontation. For to follow Venus is to face the illusions that bind you, to see not the world as it appears, but as it pulses beneath the veil. Those who found her true face did not speak it, they encoded it, in symbols, in silence, in the shape of a rose, the arc of a vault, the fold of a robe, but always, always, they kept a gate, because behind the shimmering face of Venus lies the next stage of initiation, the union of above and below, the birth of the inner star. Now the outer temples crumble behind us. The gods no longer speak from altars of stone or from the mouth of the priestess. The chants have faded, the mirrors are dark, and yet Venus still calls. She always did, because her true temple is not built of ziggurat or cedar or marble, but flesh and breath and will. From the beginning, the mystery of Venus was not about worship. It was about activation. All those cycles, 5-point figures, hidden pentagrams traced through the sky, they were never meant to remain external. They were maps of the self, diagrams of the inner spiral, etched into the soul long before we learned to look upward. The ancients understood this, the great Hermetic law, as above, so below, but few truly grasped its inversion, as within, so without. Venus does not merely orbit, she teaches, and what she teaches is this: every descent is necessary, every shedding of identity, of title, of mask, of pride, is not a loss, but a path. Like Inanna passing through her 7 gates, the initiate must surrender each layer of illusion to face their true core. This is the Venusian crucible, love as annihilation, beauty as ordeal, rebirth not as reward, but as consequence of entrance. She moves in spirals, not circles. So must we. Each 8-year cycle is not just celestial, it is biological. Studies have shown that major hormonal, psychological, and neurological changes in the human being often occur in 8-year intervals. Ancient calendars knew this, the Mayans, the Greeks. Even the Celts marked these rhythms with festivals tied to Venus's appearance. We are not separate from the sky, we are the sky, condensed, mirrored, fractalized into organic matter. This is the deeper Venusian truth, not that we are ruled by the stars, but that the stars speak our own language, the language of transformation, a divine feedback loop between macrocosm and microcosm. The pentagram she draws is also the geometry of our DNA, of the golden ratio, of the human body. The same ratio appears in the shape of the ear, the unfolding of the hand, the dance of leaves, the spiral of galaxies, all of it marked with her seal. To awaken the Venus within is not to chase aesthetic beauty or romantic love. It is to initiate the great fusion of opposites within, to marry Eros and Logos, body and mind, shadow and light. The rites of ancient cults were rehearsals for this. The rituals, the hierogamy, the mirrored halls, all meant to reflect back what the seeker already carried. A star, buried beneath memory trauma. Identity, waiting to burn. This is why her true name in Latin was Lucifer, the light bringer, not as the devil, but as the herald of inner fire, a fire not given by gods or books or bloodlines, but struck within. Through ordeal and honesty and the courage to descend, Venus is not interested in passive worship. She wants initiation. She calls not to be praised but to be entered. And in doing so, she strips away all that is false, all that clings to certainty, all that fears change, because she knows only through the crucible of unmaking can the star within the flesh ignite. And when it does, the world outside changes. Not because it bends to your will, but because you are no longer the same. You have passed the gates, seen the other face, and returned, but the journey does not end in the self. Venus teaches harmony, not only within but between souls, between polarities, between the seen and unseen, and that is where the final part leads us, to the cosmic reunion, the secret sacred marriage, where Venus no longer moves alone in the heavens. There comes a moment in every mystery, after the descent, after the fire, after the silence, when two forces meet, not in opposition, but in conjunction. This is where Venus has been leading us all along, not to the past, not to history or myth, but to this timeless point, the fusion of dualities, the sacred union at the heart of creation. The ancients knew it by many names: hieros gamos, the divine marriage in alchemy. It was called the Coniantio, the final stage, where Sol and Luna, sulfur and mercury, king and queen, unite. In Hermetic texts, this union was not symbolic. It was the true aim of the great work, and Venus, she was the bridge, not merely between man and woman, but between matter and spirit, will and love, death and rebirth. Her pentagram traced the sacred number 5, the number of the quintessence, the fifth element, that which reconciles the 4 elements of matter into something immortal. It is no accident that the Maya aligned their calendars to the Venus cycle, believing it governed cosmic balance, or that the Egyptians timed their rituals to her heliacal rising, aligning temples with her reappearance in the sky, or that the Gnostics held that Sophia, their Venus, would restore the fractured pleroma by merging with the Logos. Each tradition, each cult, each encoded text points to the same thing: Venus is the key to union. And union is not comfort, it is completion. In esoteric Christianity, Mary Magdalene carries Venus's lineage, misunderstood, vilified, erased, yet central. She anoints, she weeps, She stands at the tomb and sees the risen light. In suppressed Gospels, she is the bride of the mystery, the inner initiate, keeper of the gnosis. Her name, like Venus, is linked to the morning star in the tarot. The Empress, archetype of Venus, sits crowned. Surrounded by wheat and stars, she births not flesh, but abundance of being, the very image of divine fecundity, when masculine structure meets feminine flaw, and something beyond both is born, even the sacred architecture of cathedrals. Supposedly Christian, hides Venus's sigil in plain sight, the rosette, windows, with five-petaled symmetry, the labyrinths patterned after her orbital dance, the altars aligned to her rise. The builders knew. They preserved what the Inquisition sought to burn, that God is not male or female, not law or chaos, not light or dark, but the reconciliation of all. This is what Venus teaches in her silence, when she disappears from the sky only to reappear on the opposite horizon. She is never lost, she is crossing over. So must we. In the alchemical texts, the final stage is always the wedding, often illustrated with a crowned man and woman in embrace, above whom hovers a winged star or descending dove. It is not literal. It is a state of being, when the soul, having faced the underworld, having shed its masks, becomes whole, and in that wholeness, the seeker no longer worships Venus. The seeker becomes her not as deity, but as principle, as radiant harmony between what once seemed opposed, as the awakened star that walks in flesh, as the living union of inner and outer cosmos. So we return to the beginning. Venus is not just a planet, she is the mirror of the path, the descent, the shedding, the alchemy, the light. She is the gate and the key. She is the secret and the seeker. She is not a myth. She is you when the journey is complete, and the star is within.